Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled Justice Served for Parking Police Neighbor. It all started in July when my partner and I moved into an apartment, older house split into units. This is in a residential area and all parking is public street parking. Not 2 days from moving in, my partner gets a note on his car from the neighbor across the street that parking in front of his walkway that leads from the curb to the actual sidewalk, it's like a strip of sidewalk perpendicular to the street within that devil's strip of city-owned grass, if you know what I mean, it is illegal and that he should move it. Side note, is that illegal? I haven't found out yet, but would genuinely like to know. Also, all of those neighbors are able-bodied and the curb/walkway is not even ADA accessible, so that is not the issue at hand. In any event, we take it in stride as a neighbor who is just a bit too anal about his parking, but nothing to complain about as there is ample street parking. Then my unit neighbor tells me that parking police neighbor's wife told her to move her car from in front of her house so she could park there. That is BS though, the curb is city property, idiot. Anyways, we all dismiss it to selfish neighbors who should have bought a house with a driveway. Fast forward to a week ago and said neighbor is getting his roof replaced and has a professional crew come in. They park a trailer on our side of the street, coincidentally, in front of our little walkway. That is not a problem for us and think nothing of it as they have a job to do and it is public parking. They leave it a couple days after they get the job done, so I'm a bit curious about that ordeal. Then I see a police warning, bright yellow sign on the trailer highlighting what parking violation had been committed, leaving a storage unit/trailer in residential streets for 48 hours without moving it, and time-stamped it, noting that they will tow the trailer within 48 hours if not moved. Well, I thought to myself, that should get it moved. 48 hours comes and goes, and at this point the trailer has been in the street unmoved for a week. It's getting a little old by now, so I asked if an officer could come verify the information on the warning and see if anything could be done. The officer agrees that it needs to be towed and stays on site until a tow truck arrives. The trailer is hitched and ready to be pulled away with no conflict. Mind you, from the point of the officer arriving to the tow truck leaving was about 30 to 45 minutes, all happening under broad daylight in front of the neighbor's house. The trailer had been towed and it is finally gone. But wait, not so fast. The officer quite literally only got his wheels turned before a man stormed out of the house and leaned into the officer's vehicle, yelling and pointing his finger in his face. At this point, the neighbors and I all congregated on my porch right next to where the altercation was happening. A verbal fight ensues while the officer remains stern and tells him the inevitable. "You left a trailer out after a police warning had been given. Photo evidence was taken." You would think this man would be yelling about his trailer being taken? No, he was yelling that the officer was parked in front of his little walkway and now karma is taking its revenge. The officer is shocked that is the argument the neighbor chose to stick with and is trying everything to get him to calm down. Neighbor is still in his face, he calls backup and the circle of arguing continues. "I did not even park it in front of their walkway, and they always park in front of mine." The officer pulls out his camera to show, in fact, he did park in front of the walkway. After about 20 minutes of absolutely brain-numbing arguments that got nowhere, neighbor stomps inside and slams the door shut. He then returns in his gym clothes and drives away in a huff to go to work to out all that testosterone, I guess. Anyways, don't be a little whiny idiot over trivial parking issues, or else it is going to take getting your trailer towed and 2 cops embarrassing you in front of the town. And ripe stars, I feel like parking spot disputes are just for some people a sort of pastime activity that they really enjoy. I really don't get how some people can take parking so damn seriously. I mean, of course, if you really own your own parking spot and you pay for it every month and then someone always parks in it without permission, then I would understand it, but in this case it is just, once again, an insane neighbor. The next one is titled The Old Man and the Locomotive. Background: some time ago, around 2012, one of my customers was a certain railway. This story was told to me by the old man that came in from that railway to run parts and place orders. He didn't like to use the phone, always in person. He even gave me the gate code so I could wander around unsupervised on the weekends, which I did, and it was amazing. Anyways, this man was long retired, mid-80s, but he hated being retired. So he went back to work to do orders and parts. He brought a helper with him for anything heavy and to yak for as long as you would let him. He still worked for the railroad for fun, he loved it, it was his life. No kids, never married, I would say the railway was his wife. I learned many fascinating things from him, but I will share two here. The first is that they made everything for these trains. I mean, when I say everything, I mean foundry and lumber mill, from the castings for the locomotives and its internal and external parts and wheels to the woodworking for the seating, dining cars, plates, forks, knives, front to back, absolutely everything. All done in-house, they lived there. Housing and stores and everything, it's its own city. Because of this, no one but the yard personnel doing the work and the operators really knew much about how anything is made. This is highly relevant. The other is that they never threw any of that stuff away. Even as they develop newer and better models, it is all buried on site at those yards. It's a literal train graveyard and time capsule. Whole locomotives and cars were buried, all the things they used to build them too. Huge pits, have seen, not relevant, just interesting. So that's all for the background. This takes place in his youth when he was fairly new to the railway and an apprentice, back in the 1940s. He was apprenticed to a man who had been with this railway since the 1800s. He didn't say how old he was at the time, or he did and I don't remember, but here it goes. He told me that back then he lived at the railway. The railway had housing for the workers and him and his master were pretty much joined at the hip. He said it's like having your super experienced supervisor, who is also your neighbor, and your houses share common facilities, so you usually eat together too. His master is a few years from retirement at this point. One day his master is approached by an internal group from the same railway but from very far away. The company is throwing a large event, and for this event they have restored a very old unit to show off. The problem is that after restoring the engine while it is cooling down, it is seized. They have torn it apart twice and can find nothing wrong with it, put back together, and same thing both times while cooling off, it seizes. They are running out of time, hence them tracking down his master. His master is the last employee left they can find that still operated one of these things actively. The locomotive they restored was previously active many years before retirement. It should work fine. They want him to travel out of state to their yard to help diagnose the thing. He says he already knows the problem. He tells them he can simply give them directions, but they solidly refuse. He must go in person. He asks for $500. Going on this trip is going to put him way behind, and it is a long trip. He wants compensation. They refuse to pay him anything close to it, and he refuses to go, so they leave. A couple weeks later they come back. They have rebuilt it a third time and still it's seized. They are coming up on the date of the event and they are in panic mode, having heavily advertised the appearance of this locomotive for the event. This time he says $600 and nice accommodations for the trip, all paid, as in company will foot the bills for nicer food and hotel, and all time on the road is on the clock. They, visiting group, agree without batting an eye this time. This is going to save them from major embarrassment. He makes them take apprentice with for assistance, which they didn't even argue with. He told me they even had a driver to take them, packed, and they left the same day. Took their regular tool bags and nothing special. He said it was a 2-day ride up and they stopped at the nicest places they could for meals, stayed in nice hotels, etc. Finally, they make it to the rail yard. Several very anxious people waiting for his input. The locomotive has not been touched since they last put it together. The first thing he does is to grab his caliper. Walks down both sides of the locomotive taking measurements and making occasional markings. Then he has them fire it up. It of course runs fine, he repeats his first steps and then he has them cool it down. However, sure enough, as it is towards the end cooling down, the clink sound, the sound of the engine seizing, the old man telling me this always yells this part, making me smile. Cue mass panic by local guys, it cannot be rebuilt again in time. Master on the other hand walks the same route along the engine, making a third round of measurement and markings. He then requests a sledge from the locals, grabs the sledge and walks the engine again. This time giving a solid whack in certain marked areas, he thus repeats it a few times on each side. Master, try it now. It turns over freely. Master, do that. Hammer on their markings, every time. Said the other group was a bit shocked but thrilled and then requested he write down what he did, like he offered in the first place. The trick here was in all that all-in housework they did. With the early units, every engine was unique, they had relatively poor control of the metals and casting in general, differences in the molds and castings created different deformities in the cylinders. Bad metallurgical control back then made large differences in voids and inclusions in the metal, and as it was cooling, the differences in expansion would cause the pistons to catch. You had to know the engines, judge the differences in the casting by the color of the metal, and know where it lay cold and hot. And then, once you figured out where it was stuck, you had to break it loose, banging on it from the outside at that area, each engine its own creature. Later in production, the technologies and techniques matured as did the metallurgy, and it became a non-issue and everyone forgot. So he got his only ever paid vacation and his master got a nice fat bonus for an hour and a half of work. All because they would not accept him writing down to measure it a few times and then beat on it in the odd spots, which was the gist of the written instructions he left behind afterwards. No, they said he had to do it himself and he did all the way to the bank. And guys, if you have watched until here, I would really appreciate it if you could post some star emojis in the comments and maybe even like the video if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much in advance, your help is very much appreciated and your support means the world to me. The next one is titled 2 hours and $15 well spent. So in July of last year I was able to find a buyer for my old car. It had more or less been passed down the family, my grandma buying it new in 1992, and overall we had taken good care of it. But I had gotten my own vehicle and the 92 needed new brakes and other issues that I didn't want to spend money on, so I had been trying to sell it for around $1,000. Now my buyer is on disability payments that he only gets once a month and in his late 50s, so he asked if he could do it on payments of $400 in August and then $300 in September and October. I figured I didn't need the money so much as it would be nice to use it toward my own car payment and insurance, so I agreed and wrote up a bill of sale. For simplicity, we will call him DN for dumb neighbor. In September, I waited a few days past what DN had said. His pay date was before asking for my money. Because I hadn't come to him the day of, however, he had already spent it on groceries. I got DN's number after that and in October was able to get $200. It was December before he got it fully paid off. Now I had done one smart thing in this. I had kept the title to the car and did not sign it over until I had all of my money. And I figured I was done with him now as long as I ducked away as fast as possible. I get one call, however, in March requesting a copy of the BOS, only stating that he paid $500 instead of $1,000. Refused as I had already reported it as income, but he wanted it so he wouldn't have to pay as much in taxes to get the initial tax. Fast forward to this Wednesday, I get a voicemail from DN saying that they were not letting him license the car because the dates on the bill of sale and the title did not match. I had never exactly sold a car before, so I had not considered that, but yes, he had waited until August to actually get plates for the car that had been titled over to him since December. Apparently he is also facing potential jail time if he didn't get it done. At this point I have considered this not my problem anymore, but I figured I would be nice even though it would mean staying up after my 12-hour shift until the courthouse opened. I was not exactly happy since I had to be back to sleep at some point, but DN shows up thankfully and is pretty much ranting while we wait for the office to open how it is my fault and I needed to get a new title for him so it would all be done right. Now we get in there and the ladies at the desk explain that neither the title or a bill of sale needs to be done, that would have the same date on it, so everything is hunky-dory. DN is still insisting that we need a new title, partly as I see because he has put his address down as in another county that wouldn't have charged as much for the taxes. The ladies keep trying to explain, however, that we could just do another bill of sale and it would be fine. So the date has to match the BOS July 2018 or the title December 2018. Even half exhausted and after all the headaches he had put me through, I just waved them off and said I would pay the $15 for another title versus just doing up the new BOS that would have been free. DN did not think about the fact that he would have to pay for a full year's worth of licensing plus his coverage for 2019 to 20 on top of the taxes. Hopefully they asked for the money before he spent it all on groceries. Be a racist and lie on your neighbors. Welcome to Eviction Population U. Anyone who has seen my posts know I used to work in the private security field, not mall cops but highly trained and skilled and armed security. We worked residential buildings and complexes that were very high-end, like $200,000 cars in the parking garages high-end. Now places like this are Karen Central, imagine apartments full of Karens and entitled teenagers. Now the company owner was awesome though. A cop as his regular job, he understood what we faced. His advice was to be nice but put the hammer down if you have to and don't take their crap. Also, that if we didn't get 2 complaints a month about us for worthless crap, that we were not engaging the residents enough. So this is important to the revenge. Each supervisor had 10 to 15 properties under their control. Regular officers patrolled them, but we were in charge of helping with evictions, attending town halls on security issues, deciding how an officer patrols or updating what areas are being a problem or needing checked. I had 12. Now, in this one apartment complex we had a couple always calling us. We have an emergency line open from 6 PM to 6 AM. When we get there they cry about their upstairs neighbor. It was a list of things they just changed: stomping, music, talking, cooking smells, their dog going number 1 on the balcony and it dripping into theirs, valid complaints if we found evidence, and we never did. When they saw that we were starting to ask questions if they were real, they changed tactics and went racist. The couple above them were a sweet and wonderful middle-aged Asian couple. Husband was an immigrant, but the wife was a born and raised American. These racist cretins had only talked to the husband, so they assumed, as all racists do, that they were both immigrants. So this white sheet wearing couple started making comments like, "Those Asians," and "They are in America, why can't they cook American food?" and "I'm afraid to be in the parking garage when one of them is driving in it." While it angered me, those comments alone were not enough for an eviction. The only thing I could do was have my officers put exact phrasing in the report. I did ask the property manager about the comments and she said if they didn't say them to the residents and the residents didn't complain, there was not much she could do. So I tried to think of some way to get them evicted. Not only were they lying to get a couple evicted, but were calling in false things and wasting the officer's time to respond. And they didn't call just every once in a while, they called sometimes twice in on one night, usually 5 to 8 times a week. So a month later the opportunity was handed to me. The Asian couple called me during the day and informed me they were going out of the country to China for 2 weeks and no one would be in their apartment. They told me this just in case the other couples start complaining, I would know they were lying. and asked to check their door once a night to make sure it was locked and not broken into. I informed the Asian couple to not tell their neighbor, none of them, that they were leaving, and besides myself only tell the property manager. We had a patrol meeting that night. Officers didn't work one specific region, so I told them all my plan. I wanted them to respond each time they call and write down exactly what they said happened, and also any racial terms, no matter how minor. Also, mark the report urgent and send it out. We had an online system for all business, email, schedules, report submitting, you get the idea. So away we go. During those 14 days, they complained 18 times, everything was documented, and I took it to the manager. She looked it over and said, let's evict them. Side note, the client gets charged more for emergency response than they do for regular patrols, meaning their lives were costing more. So there was no HOA because they were rentals. In this situation, myself, the property manager and the tenants sit down at a table. The charges for eviction were read. If the eviction was security related, then I say what violations have been broken, etc., not opinions, just facts based on the reports which the tenants get a copy of. Then the tenants have a right to speak and ask questions. The property manager then decides what happens next. Do they stay or do they go? So they were sent a formal letter stating that they were facing eviction and had 10 days to set up a meeting. If not, the eviction will be processed. So they set one up. I get there and the a-hole couple and the manager are already present. The wife immediately digs into me because I was armed. Uniforms for those situations are a dress shirt, slacks, tie, and one weapon and one magazine. I just politely informed her that it was my uniform and not her call to make. She tried to say she felt uncomfortable and wanted to reschedule, but the manager said this happens now or I will evict you. So they agreed to continue. Now, for legal reasons, these sessions were recorded by video. That way the tenant cannot lie in eviction court or sue. In front of me were all 18 reports and went over each one, time, date, who called, apartment number, etc. I also read out each line telling them to tell me what they feel is false and what is true. The only thing they said is that the racial terms were not true. At the end of each report, I basically said the report is accurate in the fact that tenants in apartment XYZ were playing their music too loud, but you are claiming the comments about their race are false? I got a yes answer every time. About the 7th one, I think, the wife caught on. She started complaining that I was dragging it out. I just smiled politely and reminded her that this was my time, and she ampled the opportunity to object and ask me questions, but only after I was done, and then went through the rest and let them build a defense. Then, after I was done getting them to admit to their lies, I informed them that tenants in said apartment were actually out of the country at the time of those 18 reports, and that the tenants provided proof that they were gone, and my officers checked the apartment one time a night and confirmed it was empty. Then I smiled pleasantly and ended my part, but the look on their face was a mix of anger and fear. They did not have a defense, basically saying myself and the manager were choosing immigrants over Americans. And oh, did I mention the manager is an immigrant? That went over like a hand grenade in a collection plate. Once they said that she stopped it and told them she was, that made matters worse because they said she was just taking up for her own kind. During this I am calm and collected. Inside my mind I am thinking, oh damn. After a few more racial remarks, the manager just stopped them and said guilty, and she would process the eviction paperwork with the courts in the morning. Long story short, they were given 14 days. From what I heard, the judge gave them 30 until they called him a racial name. I was able to call the nice Asian couple and let them know that it was over and they didn't have to worry because we would no longer respond to calls about their apartment for the next 14 days until eviction came through and the bad tenants left. But they were welcome to call anytime if they need help or have an issue. Security officers want to help so bad but are limited by either laws, property management rule or both, so it is nice to do some good. And ripe stars, with this we have unfortunately reached the end of today's video. However, if you cannot get enough of my stories, then I would highly suggest you to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will show up at any moment in the left corner of the screen, which includes over 1000 ripe stories. In addition, if you would like to share one of your own stories, then please head on over to r/ripe stories on Reddit, where you can post your own story and there is a good chance that I might read it in a video. In addition, please also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos that you won't find on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, your daily support is very much appreciated, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.